for YouTube?
Yes, I can send you over the link for YouTube as well.
Yeah.
At some point, let me just.
Yeah, but apologies, yeah.
So that is an extremely funny start to the video. It's all right. It's all right. No worries with it whatsoever. But yeah, as you said there, the international break is over. We're back into the swing with the Premier League. And of course, we're talking to you from the Numbers Game channel. So just to quickly remind everybody, you can join up for free for the membership on the Numbers Game channel. And you get this most amazing data, which I will be talking to you through today with each of the kind of games, each injury news, and that'll be helping you with your selections, whether you're engaged in Fantasy Premier League, whether you're engaged in something like Fan Team, or even if you're making some bets. But we have to go first and foremost alphabetically with Bournemouth FC. So how's the international break affected them?
I mean, as always, after a national break, the caveat is we're having players who have been playing in all corners of the globe. And yes, we have late arrivals. We have players who are coming back injury-free, but they're coming back with limited recovery time. And we've heard from several managers today with regards to players who are there in body, but are looking a little bit tired and a little bit fatigued. So we can talk through that. But generally, like I say as well, there are always going to be one or two surprises in terms of team news because, managers, backroom staff, physios, medical departments, sports science teams just haven't got that time to be able to do that quick turnaround by the time the press conference comes along to give a full evaluation of the current squad. So just to have that there. But yeah, look, Bournemouth, we heard from Andoni Areola this afternoon, and generally everybody's come back from that international break looks to be absolutely fine. Of course, they're coming off the back of that 1-0 victory at Tottenham. So they're really on an upturn, and the Cherries could, in fact, be unchanged. From the team that finished that game, we did see Adam Smith go off. That was a hamstring injury. That's been confirmed. It looks as if there's going to be a couple of more weeks on the sidelines for him. Julian Arajo, he returns after suspension, but he doesn't really threaten a start in that 11 for Bournemouth.
Well, that is good news then for Bournemouth. And I guess with the other injury news there, it's all long-term inavailability, isn't it? There's no real kind of people on the cusp of a return. Last season, there was quite a few attackers that really kind of blunted them. But the only one now really is Enes Unal.
Yeah, he obviously coming back from that ACL injury. So we're looking at the latter part of this year. And we know we've had discussions before with regards to that. It's not really that return to play. It's the return of performance. And, we could be looking at going into 2026 before we're starting to see the Enes Unal sort of pre-injury. Just to touch upon a point you did make, Lewis Cook has been training with the team, not fully, just parts of those first team sessions. He's been out with an MCL, so that's a medial collateral knee ligament injury, and he isn't too far away. But again, due to that lack of pre-season and training in his legs, if he makes the bench, then it's certainly a bonus for the Cherries.
And the Cherries are obviously taking on Brighton this weekend. And, again, with the numbers game data, actually Brighton, even though they're away on the road to the Cherries, they're kind of predicted to do better. What do you think are the reasons for that, Ben?
I love Fabian Hertzler. I think he's a great manager. And I do like Brighton as a club overall. I think it's run really well on and off the pitch. We've seen the likes of Adingra lead in the summer. We've seen Danny Welbeck and Jorginho Rutter sort of fighting it out for that attacking berth. They're just extremely, well run. There's been a lot of players sort of moving on in recent history, the McAllisters as well, the Caicedos, and they've always got a plan B, C, and D, people to come in. And, this season, again, they recruited really heavily sort of last summer, and some of those sort of purchases which are coming in, they've had that period to bed into the squad, and they're really grown within the team. You get used to the rigors and adapting to Premier League, and I think it's coming together. I mean, they're by no means are they the finished article, but they're more than capable of taking any team in the Premier League on their day and pushing them all the way. So, like I say, they're a really sort of well-run team on and off the pitch. And like I say, they've got some real quality within the ranks. We've touched upon it before. Conor Matoma probably hasn't hit the heights that I'd like to see, but I'm expecting a big season from him.
And so, just to remind people as well, all this information that we're talking through is on the Numbers Game website. You can sign up for a membership for free. Also, subscribe to the channel because you get to see me and Ben every Friday talking about all the football news. And we also have some great content on here as well. But let's turn our attention to the Gooners, Arsenal. There should be some positive news coming after this international break. Main attention will be on the news of William Saliba and also Bukayo Saka. So are they likely to return in this game week?
Well, the long and the short of it, we were initially told from reports within France that William Saliba was probably looking at around about 3, potentially 4 weeks out in the treatment room. Well, it actually looks as if there's an outside chance that he could make the squad. Mikel Arteta has confirmed that the French centre-back has trained. So that ankle injury, that ankle sprain that he sustained while warming up against Liverpool, maybe it's not as severe as first thought. So providing he's come through that session and providing there's no reaction overnight, then, Saliba could be in with a shout of starting. Of course, he's coming off the back of limited time on the pitches, so that might be the only concern. For Bukayo Saka, it's a hamstring injury. You've got to be a lot more careful with those types of problems, especially given his recent history. Unfortunately, he's out of this one. Arteta typically very coy, and maybe rightly so, that he doesn't want to put any pressure on, rushing Saka back, especially now, with these other attacking options that he has at his disposal.
We just had a nice bit of data here as well from Oliver McFeely. He says Brighton have won their last 5 of their last 6 games against Bournemouth too. So really good bit of history there for people making decisions on that game. And just kind of bring it back to the numbers game data. Because of all that has gone on over this international break, it has gone up to a massive 66% chance for Arsenal to win against Nottingham Forest. We can talk about tactics, we can talk about discussions all day, but that's not what Ange Postecoglou does. So we're not going to bore ourselves with that. He's just going to go out there and play pure vibes football. How disastrous is this for Nottingham Forest to go from, a manager a lot of people would say is sometimes a bit boring, quite defensive, but it gets the results, especially for smaller teams in the league. And now they've gone with somebody who's basically akin to an anarchist. Why, Ben? What is the point?
Well, if you forget about Nuno's early season rants against the owner, which obviously would have had a bearing on the decision. You can say what you want about Ange Postecoglou and his style of play and this, that, and the other, but he's a winner. He's proved that he wins trophies, and he has done that on several continents and several teams in different leagues. So look, that gung ho approach, he's and he is able to adapt when he wants to. There was a fairly pragmatic approach for the European final against United. Certainly not one that will live in the memory. But they got the job done, ground out a result. I don't think we will quite see the way Ange would like his team to play this weekend. Simply, there just hasn't had enough time to work with the players on the training pitches. And even if that was everybody there, but again, they're coming back in drips and drabs, and some would have been involved in team training, while others will probably be working on recovery sessions. So I'm a big fan of Postecoglou. I know, you might have a different feelings for, because of maybe it's something to do with the North London rivals. I don't know, but look, I would like to see him do well. I thought Nuno was a little bit unfortunate, but when you're coming out and you're saying those things against the owner, then you suspect the writing was on the wall from since before we kicked the ball in the Premier League this season.
I do agree as well. It seemed just a very odd situation, and I think quite disrespectful to poor Nuno Espirito Santo, because he's got Nottingham Forest into Europe for the first time in goodness knows how many years. It's a bit kind of like Claudio Ranieri, with Leicester, and then they sack him the season after he wins the league with them. There's obviously a lot of fairy tale and things around sport. Maybe Ranieri's was a little bit different because they were near to the relegation zone. Nuno's football was not anywhere near that at the moment. But there's no sentimentality in football, is there? It's all about the results. Just in terms of the result, though, like I said, Arsenal with a 66% chance likelihood of a victory there at home against Nottingham Forest, and also massive odds here. 41% chance of a clean sheet. So GV mentioned very rare for Calafiori to not be injured. Well, he's looking at a 41% chance of a clean sheet, and it could be goals as well, because it looks like 59% chance of over 1.5 goals for Arsenal in this game. I think that's a very good shout there. So after Arsenal is Aston Villa, and they're the team who really, really have underperformed against expectations so far this season. They are 19th. They can't score. They can't seem to keep a clean sheet. Everything's going wrong for them at the moment. But is it due to injuries, Ben?
The squad has been pretty settled. Although we do expect the return of Emi Martinez between the sticks. He was heavily linked with the move away. Many touted his destination to be at Old Trafford. How close that deal was or likely to be, we'll never quite know. But suffice to say, he committed his future to Villa Park. There were big links out to Turkey, but he's declined there. So we do expect Emi Martinez to be back in goal. Elsewhere within the squad, we've got a few long-term absentees. Amadou Nana is one that picked up a hamstring problem. We did think he was going to be there or thereabouts, but unfortunately this weekend's come a little bit too soon. Elsewhere, Boubou Kamara, again, that was another hamstring problem. That's going to be too soon. There was concerns over Matty Cash. He picked up an impact injury playing for Poland during the international break. Thankfully, that his withdrawal was more of a precautionary measure. I think the Polish coach referenced it as a big bruise on the thigh or a dead leg. Anyway, he has trained. He's fit and available for the Villains this weekend.
But that isn't affecting them that much in terms of predicted output. So Everton are shockingly ahead in their predicted victory kind of here. They've got 38% chance of winning. Do you believe in that, Ben? Do you think that actually the Toffees could get a victory against Aston Villa, against kind of the odds, against the history? Normally in recent years gone by, it's been Villa who've had it over Everton. Although we do have to say this is on the road, and Villa aren't the best on the road under Unai Emery.
Yeah, new stadium. You've got the home supporters behind them, and of course you factor in the Jack Grealish. He's just been awarded Player of the Month for August. He's been fantastic. I think he's only played 197 Premier League minutes, but he still leads the way in terms of expected assists for the Premier League. He's a player who, by the way, I've had him since game week 1 in my fantasy team, just putting that straight out there. So there's a little bit of momentum there. And, David Moyes has brought in a few players. Unfortunately, what we will touch upon, there are a few injury doubts within that Everton camp, which could impact on that. But look, if I was to, have to pick a winner this weekend, then my money would be going on the Toffees.
Wow. That is a huge shout indeed. And just to remind everybody that we go through all of these alphabetically, so that when people watch a little bit later, they can obviously start with AFC Bournemouth, Arsenal, Aston Villa. So we will get on to obviously the opponents of Aston Villa, Everton, a little bit later on. And we do have a question about Aina from Nottingham Forest, but again, we'll cover that when we get to them. But up next is Brentford. And, there's been a lot of talk around the club, all the chopping, all the changing. There seems to be not a lot of positives there, Ben. But can you give any positive injury news at least?
Yeah, Vitani Janelt, he's been sidelined since, to be honest, he was managing an ongoing foot problem, plantar fasciitis, throughout last season. So he was available, but his minutes were needed to be managed, and he wasn't able to perform optimally. He went under the knife around about sort of late April. He's had a 45-minute run out for the B team during the international break, so he's back in contention to be in the B squad. Again, it's not somebody that I would expect to come straight into that start 11, but certainly in terms of, you know, bolstering that bench, he's a big boost. He's a good player for Brentford. So, you know, that there's certainly a boost in that regard.
That is quite funny, though, to say the B team for the Bees.
It's not one that you want to be seeing after a few drinks, Jason.
Yes, yeah, you don't want to say that one too quickly. But going into this match, they've only got 22% chance of victory. They are at home. Is this just going to be the story for them all this season, Ben? Do you think that they are now one of the favourites to go down?
You know, before the ball was kicked at the start, you'd look at those, you know, 3 promoted teams, and you'd think, you know, especially what we've seen last year, and how they all struggled, you'd expect the same. But, you know, Sunderland have come up, and on the back of their start at home at the Stadium of Light, you would think that maybe that home support and that home form, you know, could carry them through. So then you're looking at maybe one of the old guard to possibly go down there. I really like Keith Andrews. I think he speaks well. And I, you know, I don't dislike Brentford as a team. Of course, they're going to struggle. You know, when you take the goals out of a Johan Wissa and a Brian Mbeumo out of your team, then it's always going to be an uphill struggle. So it's going to be tough. I certainly wouldn't expect them, you know, to be pushing top half. I think if they can finish anywhere between maybe 14th and 16th, I think that's you know, that would be a good season for them. You know, consolidate, transitioning post Thomas Frank, and then, you know, rebuild.
So GV says Brentford are usually strong at home. They'll score, is his prediction, but he doesn't know the head-to-head results between Bees and Chelsea. I'll quickly look up that head-to-head data again. Great stuff from the Numbers Game website. You can just
I'm
quickly
sure.
look that.
If I recall, I'm sure the Bees are winless in 4 against Chelsea at home. So, you know, Chelsea have got a half decent record there at the G Tech, and, you know, given the form that Chelsea have been in, you know, the only, I suppose, if you're looking for something to maybe pick, you could think, you know, well, you know, Chelsea have had a lot of players away during the break, and we heard Enzo Maresca reference at least, you know, the 3 Brazilian players who he considers to be all doubts following their late return. You also had Moses Caicedo, who was managing a little bit of a knee problem and just returned, I think, was from Colombia. So, you know, it depends on you know, how the managers want to line up this weekend, which, you know, that could work into Brentford's favour.
So just kind of put my phone up to the camera for people to see, but it's really easy. You can kind of see the head-to-head data there. But with it, like you said, Ben, you're spot on. You know your stuff. Loving the mug, by the way, the Hard Rock mug. You are a hard rocker. In terms of it, you're spot on there. And it seems actually that Brentford seem to do better when they're away, when they're at Stamford Bridge. So, you know, it's not a lot is pointing to any kind of positivity here for them. So maybe GV might not be correct with them getting a goal, because it seems like they haven't even scored a goal in those winless games there as well. But he does say Brentford are ticking along well and should do well. And I hope so as well. I do like Brentford a lot. So, you know, I have no negative feelings against them. Let's move on to Brighton, though, and we've already kind of covered them because they were playing against Bournemouth, but we haven't covered their team news. Now, you've already waxed lyrical about Hertzler, the manager. I think Brighton are doing a fabulous job towards the end of last season, but also continuing that into this season. Should there be anything to stop them, though, from the injury front?
2 long-term absentees. We know Adam Webster unfortunately suffered an ACL injury before ball was kicked at Angus. So unfortunately, you know, the expectation is we won't see him again. And Solly March, he's another player who suffered that ACL problem. I think we're probably going back to around about 2023 now. And it's been a bit of an uphill task to try and get the winger fit and playing consistently. As we know, there are always secondary little setbacks with this. He's had another small procedure on his knee. There's been sort of times when it looks as if he's been at the cusp of a first team return. There was talk, between sort of this international break in October, but now Hertzler has come out and he says, look, there's been a couple of sort of issues that we are managing. There's nothing imminent in terms of return. We're hopeful that will happen before the end of the year. So, there's a suggestion that we could probably be looking at maybe December now before we see Solly Marsh, back and forcing his way back into first team contention.
And like to remind people there on the Numbers Game website, 40% chance of victory there against Bournemouth, even though they are travelling along that south coast to the Cherries. Now, Burnley are up next, and probably they have the worst game of the weekend. Not much to be positive about, especially with Liverpool finally getting that man, Alexander Isak. But we'll chat about that a little bit later, because I don't think he will be starting in that game. So maybe he won't be too much of a problem for the Burnley defence. But what have Burnley got going on in their dressing room? Is there any positive or negative news?
There were concerns over Ekdal, who looked to have picked up a little bit of a knock playing for Sweden during the international break. Of course, the centre-back is pivotal to the Clarets' defence. Fortunately, it looks like he's okay. He's been given the all clear, so probably more of a precautionary measure. Elsewhere, again, Scott Parker's come back and he said all of those international players look to be fine and firing and are available. One player that we had hoped to see or hoped to be in and around the squad was Connor Roberts, but again, he's just not responding as hoped. There may have been a little bit of setback in there, and as it currently stands, there's no definitive timeline, although, it is an outside chance that he could maybe return before the international break in October.
And there's also an interesting fact, it might not be a fact at all after this weekend, but, they've lost both of their games away from home. But so far this season, Burnley have won both of their home games, one of them obviously being Carabao Cup fixture, but the other against Sunderland. Maybe they'll be turning Turf Moor into a harder fixture. Do you think there's a possibility there? Do you think that there's that tactical nous, especially coupled up with how bad Liverpool have played, despite winning 9 points from 9? Or is it just hoping against hope there?
Yeah, I mean, look, if any of those promoted teams harbour any aspirations of staying in the Premier League, then, their home form needs to be on point. Do I think we're going to be in a position to be able to sort of stem the flow from an Arsenal attack with or without Alexander Isak? Probably not. No. The percentages would have us certainly leaning to a comfortable win. But again, we're coming off the international break, and maybe it's just a little bit of fatigue in those legs. I'm hoping, for any little sort of chink of light for Burnley supporters, but the reality is it's probably going to be a really tough day at the office. And I would expect Liverpool, who haven't been great this season, but what they have done, like true champions, they have been able to grind out the 3 results so far. And like I say, I don't expect that to change this weekend, although it probably will be a lot closer than many people think.
One of the interesting points that GV has said is that promoted teams with names starting with B must be aware of the fact that Liverpool hammered Bournemouth 9-0. I don't know if Ollie or Sam are watching, but I wonder what the odds are on that, because that would be an insane guess if GV got that on.
I'll give you the money myself if it's 9.
There you go. You've heard it here, people. Ben will pay out of his pocket. Just put in the comments below if you agree. 9-0. But let's move on to Chelsea. And they've had a bit of a big injury blow, haven't they, Ben, with Liam Delap being ruled out. But also, what else is there? Because, there's worries over Cole Palmer, Garnacho. There's a little bit of a worry in this team at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, so where to start? I mean, I suppose the headline was Cole Palmer missing out on game week 3. That's an adductor issue. It's something that he had been managing. It was a little bit of a niggle there. He was pulled out last minute and protected. The expectation was that Cole would be back, in and around the squad in game week 4. Of course, he missed out for England. He has trained, but again, it's limited time on the training pitches. We need to see how he responds today, Friday, and then a final decision will be made. What I would always say about these touch and go decisions, these 50-50 calls, when people are saying, will he play, will he not? Well, we kind of give a definitive answer. What I would say is we're having a player who's had very minimal amount of time, working ahead of this game. So reality is he going to be able to perform optimally? And do you think he's going to start? And I would suggest that probably no to a start. And, the likelihood is that, he's probably going to just want to play himself in to these games. And I wouldn't expect him to sort of be pulling up, any trees, given, like I say, there will be a little bit of rustiness in there. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he was to miss out. Enzo Maresca talked about managing Cole Palmer's minutes going forward, because he's a player who, previously, like Bukayo Saka at Arsenal, he was one of the mainstays of that starting 11. But he's picked up a couple of little sort of knocks and a couple of little niggles. And now, Maresca's got a squad where he probably thinks, you know what, we can sort of take him out the firing line. Gone now are the conversations which were, no Cole Palmer, no goal. We've seen, I think Chelsea hit 5 without Palmer at the London Stadium. So it looks as if maybe they've got that monkey off the back, and certainly the pressure isn't there to involve Cole Palmer, for every minute of every game.
I think that's one of the realities, isn't it? That people need to know, I guess, for this season, especially with these mega squads, Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea. A lot of the time when there's a 50-50 chance over maybe a player playing, just don't take the chance, because your phrase, the best ability is availability, and kind of taking those chances there, whether you're playing fantasy team, whether you're playing fan team, whether you're betting, it's just a risk that you don't need to take, because these are highly valued assets. They're going to be managed in very specific ways that we don't even know what the club is thinking at the moment. So the best kind of way to do it is just play around, the Premier League, however we're kind of guessing, play conservatively, I guess, would be the message, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in the official game, I would, for me, it would be a player that I'd probably look to bench. I do actually own Palmer on the Telegraph, where you are limited in terms of the number of transfers that you could hold over the season. So because we're certainly not looking at anything which is significantly long term, then I'd be happy to sort of leave him in that starting 11. If you're talking about, a fan team, the one-off, the dailies. Again, he's not a player that I'd be going for. And if you're looking at it from a betting perspective, then that's certainly a consideration, as well as the fact that Estivo and João Pedro, you mentioned Liam Delap potentially out for up to 3 months, are all players who are, like I say, either ruled out or questionable for this one.
And so, even as you said there, even with Palmer potentially being out, Chelsea is still at a 56% chance of victory there, which, again, you can head over to Numbers Game website for a free membership for it. But let's concentrate on Crystal Palace, who I've been very impressed with so far this season. I think that they played very well, but they've also got the longest unbeaten run of any team in the Premier League. And I think that's going to continue. They've got 47% chance against Sunderland of victory. I think the huge thing for them, injuries aside, transfers aside, keeping Mark Gay was amazing business. What do you think on that one, Ben?
Yes, I didn't think many people foreseen Mark Guy playing for Crystal Palace after the international break. We don't quite know how close that move was to Liverpool. Arne Slot suggests it was very close. Oliver Glasner said, discussions behind the scenes were ultimately, with the owner that said, the amount of games that we're going to be playing, it would be a huge risk to lose somebody of the quality of Mark Guy. So it's a huge bonus. The only thing that you would possibly even question is the temperament of the player and his frame of mind. He's made no bones about the fact that he wanted to join Liverpool. I understand that it's been a dream of his for quite a while, and that was the only sort of real destination that had sort of Mark Guy excited. There was certainly nothing evident of that playing for England, but back at Crystal Palace, I mean, if he's those pre sort of deadline day performances or anything to go by, then Palace have nothing to worry about with that regard. There may be more issues as we approach sort of December and the January window, and links potentially away from the club. But for me, I think it's a great fixture for Palace. If it wasn't Sunderland, away from the stadium, right, at Selhurst Park, I'd maybe be a little bit more concerned because the absence of Ismail Sarr, who has been fantastic this season. He's been a great outlet for the Eagles. Unfortunately, that hamstring problem looks to will probably keep him out more towards the end of this month. And I think he's going to be a huge miss, although I think Pinto, it has been earmarked for his first start for the club following a move from Villarreal. But again, what you do elsewhere in Europe, in La Liga, that doesn't necessarily always, reflect well against players coming into the Premier League. Certainly not, within those sort of first few games.
And what's the latest on Adam Morton as well? Because he's so important for that defensive structure. He's the steely man in the midfield there, making and breaking play. He's picked up a bit of is it a groin injury or a pelvic injury? Is he going to be able to play this weekend?
Yeah, that's an adductor issue. Unfortunately not. Again, there's an outside chance that he could potentially return in game week 5. The reality is, I think Palace play Liverpool in a couple of weeks, and it's maybe that one. So Adam Wharton's probably got an outside chance for next week, but certainly with regards to this game against Sunderland, that's a big no. But so I think the fixture gods have been very kind to Palace, and for that reason, I think they might just again squeeze a narrow 3 points.
So on to the Toffees, Everton. What's the latest for their injury back news?
Yeah, so there's been a few issues in terms of players who are potentially facing late fitness tests. Mykolenko was a player that picked up a problem against Wolves, did complete 90 minutes, but went away with Ukraine in return without kicking a ball. That was a problem that got gradually worse. So David Moyes, has been checking, hasn't had a lot of training, so there will be a late call on him. There's also Ndai, who has been great under David Moyes. I think he got the last goal ever at Goodison Park and also the first at the new stadium. So he's been great under David Moyes. He's took a bit of a knock. I think it was a heavy knock on his foot. So again, that's a 50-50 call, but like I say, the expectation is I think he probably should come through that. A few of the longer term absentees, and Nathan Patterson, that's a bit of a hernia issue. He could come into the squad. Hasn't had any minutes in terms of behind closed doors friendlies or anything like that. So there's going to be a little bit of rustiness. Maybe a place on the bench. We were hopeful that Jared Branthwaite would be forced and backing himself into contention, but that hamstring problem is going on a little bit longer than we thought, and it's probably, again, a couple of weeks away from really pushing to maybe rejoin James Tarkowski in the heart of that Everton defence.
And the fact that he's been out for such a long time as well, did it affect his pre-season too? So has he actually had an ability to build up fitness before the start of the season?
Yeah, we've touched upon the pre-season program and providing that cornerstone for, the rest of that upcoming campaign. And that was being heavily disrupted with a hamstring problem as well, which carried over from the end of 2024 to 25. So again, you're not talking about a player who is, like I say, just spent a bit of time on the sidelines, but he's had that good sort of base foundation level of fitness. It just hasn't been there. And we know, the research and the science will tell us once you miss those blocks of training, the risk of picking up another injury increases significantly. So he's a player that, one, will have to be managed very carefully, and two, it's going to take him a little bit longer to get back up to speed. But when the games are coming thick and fast, there's not much happening on the training pitches. It's a very sort of challenging and difficult time to be able to do that. So it's a fine balance, and one that the club will have to manage very carefully.
So let's turn our attention to Fulham, who seem to have almost a totally clear back row. How have they done it, Ben?
Yeah, look, they've been relatively, injury-free all season, and even Marco Silva referenced the fact that he had a full squad out on the training pitches this week, players coming back from international duty. So, yeah, it was a little bit threadbare at one point, but, Marco Silva, well-documented issues with recruitment, but they did bring some players in, on deadline day, although, yeah, they have lost a few with regards to sort of Andres Pereira being one of those, but he should have more or less a full squad to choose from. So, that's good, thankfully, for the Cottagers.
Yes, and this predictive data actually puts them at a 39% of victory there at home. I just, I've seen a lot of Fulham so far this season, and they've just really lacked a lot. But maybe against Leeds, this could be a fixture that opens them up and gets them playing well. But is it also the injury news from Leeds? Because we're going to look at them now. What's the latest there? Because it seems that there's been even more additions. And this seems to be like a perennial issue. Whenever Leeds are in the Premier League, they do seem to pick up a lot of injuries. So is that maybe why Fulham are favoured in that home fixture?
Yeah, I mean, previously, I suppose you reference Bielsa ball and, the style of play, under the manager, where it was really, balls to the wall, as it were, and there was a lot of soft tissue and muscle problems picked up during that period. Slightly different now under Daniel Farker. And we've had a mixed update from the manager on Thursday. I suppose in terms of good news, we had both Tanaka and Ethan Ampadu, two players who suffered very similar knee injuries, MCL, medial collateral ligament injuries. They've progressed much quicker than initially hoped, so they've got an outside chance of being in the squad. Will they force their way back into that starting 11? I'm not so sure. Sean Longstaff was a player who had come into that Leeds midfield. He got man of the match against his former club, Newcastle, last time out. I think so anyway. I think I fell asleep after about 50 minutes. So, Sean Longstaff wouldn't be a player I would expect to drop out. So Daniel Farker has the luxury of maybe able to manage those. Unfortunately, they do lose their goalkeeper, Lucas Perry. Again, that was a quad injury picked up in that Newcastle game. Probably we're looking at 2, possibly even 3 weeks. Elsewhere, Lucas Mecca and we have Joel Peru. 2 injuries there. Again, nothing too severe or significant with those 2 players, but again, ones that will need to be checked and managed with a late call on those. And, you do question, if they are past fit, are they able to perform optimally at 100%? And that's what Leeds will need this season, on a regular basis to try and, maintain and keep that Premier League status. They're going to need their best players, and you're going to need a relatively fit squad with a little bit of luck along the way, to keep them competing.
I guess the worry as well is who's going to come in as the replacement goalkeeper, because we've seen previously Ilham Meslier was terrible goalkeeper in the Premier League, but he's no longer at the club, is he? So who is the one going to be between the sticks?
Yeah, well, the expectation is we're probably looking at Carl Darlow, and I understand his last Premier League start, I think, was from his time on Tyneside.
Wow.
So again, we're bringing I think he's around 34 now. He was a great servant of the club. Wouldn't have a bad word said against him. He was an admiral sort of deputy backup. So my expectation is that he will come into that Leeds lineup this weekend.
Okay. So we've also got a message from GV. He said, Fulham pitch is the narrowest in the Premier League. Will it help Notto and Dan James or not? What do you think? Will that suit their style?
You know, Will it? I mean, the time will tell. You know, I mean, it's a good question, and it is one theory. Um, Dan James is a player that likes to get in behind. You know, the Leeds will want to play with a little bit of width. Um, I don't know. I think players are, players at a Premier League level now are so clever and they can adapt. They're versatile in how they play. Long gone are where players are just, predominantly those sort of out and out orthodox, wide men. A lot of players are cutting inside anyway. You have those inverted wingers, right footers on the left, and so on and so forth. So I don't think the fact that, we have these narrower pitches and players condensed a little more. I just think, like I say, managers are a lot more savvy. You have, with those analysts and researchers, you have way of combating those, and they'll be working, on ways of trying to combat how Fulham play and different, philosophies and formations and setups. How to combat those sort of narrow areas, and that may just force Daniel Faulkner down a different route. So you cannot go in with one game plan in mind in the Premier League, because you quickly get found out, aka Ange Postecoglou. You've got to have a plan B, a plan C, and even D, E, and F, because, like I say, these are players of the highest level, and they will quickly work out how to combat your threats.
So continuing on with the analysis, and Liverpool are up next. I said that this is probably one of the easiest games of the weekend, but do they have the positive news that Jeremy Frimpong might be there to really disrupt the Burnley backline? Or is it, again, one of those muscular injuries that just has to be managed very carefully, especially with the fact that it's his first season in the Premier League?
It's a hamstring. So, yes, all of the above, very difficult. The return of Connor Bradley, makes the decision for Arne Slot that little bit easier if he wants to go down that route. But you've also have Sobasai, who he's talked about and who played in there. You've got Endo. You've also got Joe Gomez. So there's lots of options. So there's no need to necessarily take any risks. So you're coming off the back of 3 straight wins, so I don't expect too many changes, and I wouldn't expect Arne Slot to be rushing Frimpong back, certainly in that starting 11. Given the fact that, again, there's going to be that period of sort of adaptation just to the intensity of the Premier League.
So let's turn our attention then to the Manchester derby. Manchester City have 11 players potentially out, and Manchester United have 4. But I think this is a hard one to call. However, I shall consult the predictive data. But Ben, talk us through Manchester City.
Yeah, we've had a couple of confirmed absentees. Pep Guardiola, very guarded as always, but Ait-Nouri looks to have picked up a knock, so he's definitely out. We also seen Churchy, who's going to be sidelined now for potentially around 6 to 8 weeks. There's also question marks over John Stones. He was a withdrawal from the England squad because of a slight muscular issue. Nothing serious, but we know with John Stones that historically is a player that does, pick up injuries quite easily. So he will be managed. The only other player that we're looking at is Omar Mamouche. He was forced off playing for Egypt. That's a knee problem. Again, I think it was MCL in a challenge. Egyptian FA didn't paint a great picture at first. Pep seems to think otherwise, that Marmouche will return before the international break. But again, whether that's in a week or 2 or possibly even 3, evaluations are ongoing, so we should know potentially by the end of this week.
Just want to quickly bring it back to Liverpool discussions. GV has asked Bradley to start. Do you think it's time?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think.
Do you want to put one of the patented Premier injuries percentages there of status, Ben's brain, 50%, 70%?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough call, but I think the international break again is affording the opportunity to get some more minutes and get some training in his legs, so that would have been the concern before the break again, because he's a player that very young. The level of expectation coming in as many seen as a replacement for Trent. So there's pressure associated with that. But I'm going to say I'm going to go with a conservative 65%.
Yeah,
that he starts.
You don't add 4 more percent to that.
Yeah, that's for the that's for your fans.
Yes.
Recording later.
So I guess we've covered everything from the Manchester City end of news. Manchester United then, it seems like there's a few long-term absences, Lisandro Martinez, but we've also got to talk about Cunha, Mount and Dalot. These are huge blows for the team.
They are, yes. And the long and the short of it is he won't be, featuring in this game. Unfortunately, we sort of knew with Matheus Cunha, anybody that goes down with a hamstring injury, that pulls up in that way, you suspect that, you're not really recovering within that 2-week period. You've got to be very, very careful. It's probably something, maybe around that 3 to 4 weeks on a really good day. So, towards the end of this month, before the international break, that would be a bonus for Man United. But again, the considerations will be around, it's not necessarily here and now. Once they're back, we need to make sure that they stay, fit and available and healthy for the team. And with, the games coming thick and fast, they will certainly want that. But he's going to be a big blow for United being out of this one.
Yes. And, like you said, they're a big blow for Manchester United, and that's reflected in the predicted data. 55% chance of Manchester City to win at home at the Etihad. It looks to be all in their direction there. So, is there even a faint chance that Manchester United could win, Ben? Or is this game a written off one? Is this kind of following on from seasons and seasons, Man City's dominance is just going to continue in the north?
I don't think it can write off any result in a derby. The form book, seems to go out the window. United have a fairly decent record in recent times in the Manchester derby. So for that reason, there is hope. I certainly don't think, the opening day victory at Wolves, and we thought, right, well, this is a City that we missed from last season, and we thought all this influx of players has settled and this was going to be it. Then they get turned over by Tottenham, and then they blow a 1-0 lead against Brighton, who come back and steal it at the death. So City aren't in a great place either. I think they're two very evenly matched teams. I don't think there's a great deal. Manchester United, I think in terms of their XG, they're the highest in the Premier League over the first 3 games, or certainly in the top 2, so they're there or thereabouts. So maybe results aren't necessarily reflective of the performances. I'll sit on the fence with this one. I fancy United to take the lead and City to claw it back, and there will be an entertaining score draw.
Yeah, and just kind of looking after you said you weren't sure about the kind of games between Man United and Man City in history. Well, Man City haven't won at home in this derby since 2024. So the last results have been 0-0, 2-1 to Man United, 1-1, 2-1 to Man United, and then 3-1. I'm not sure what happened in the Community Shield, who won that game, but in normal time, we shall say that there hasn't been a victory since all that a long time ago. I was pretty shocked reading that. So yeah, it is a very hard one to predict. But let's move on to Newcastle for their game this weekend. Ben, is this one an easier one to predict?
Never easy with Newcastle. I try not to be swayed too much with the black and white tinted glasses. The return of Joe Linton is massive for us. He's a huge player. touched upon it at the start of the show. Getting rid of Alexander Isak, that probably lifts a bit of a cloud. And then, we've recruited quite well, although Johan Wissa is out of this game with a knee injury that he picked up on international duty. We're also another new signing, Jacob Ramsey, suffered an ankle injury down at Ellen Road. He's also out and probably will not return until next month. So that's a bit of a blow. Eddie has a big decision to make with regards to who he starts up top. Anthony Gordon, of course, is still suspended. He'll, I think he has another game or two before he's back in contention. So it's whether he decides to stick with Osula or, Walton Maid to come in. He's fit, he's fine. He did play for Germany, but it would be a big ask for the striker again to come in, very limited time with these new teammates. But in Wolves, again, I don't think necessarily their performances reflect their current position in the league. I think they have been unlucky. So I think it might be, a little bit tougher than everybody expects, but fingers crossed we're going to come away with a narrow win. It could be just a 1-0 or, a 2-0 with a goal at the death to seal it.
Yeah, I mean, the predicted data is putting this as one of the favourite games of the weekend. Newcastle to win, 61% right there. So you can maybe rest a little bit easy there, Ben. But like you said, there are some, concerns around. And, from a neutral perspective, I'm really excited to see what Johan Wissa actually does at Newcastle. You and I both, for a long time, we've really rated him as a striker. We've waxed lyrical many times. If anything, maybe he's been overshadowed by the likes of Tony and Burmo, whereas he's been consistently having this really good underlying data and just matching it. But he's I guess, maybe just not caught the limelight like everybody else. So yeah, hopefully he is back sooner than expected. Nottingham Forest up next, though, and we are going to answer the question about Aina now that somebody put in the questions. So there was a question about why was he put out of the European squad if he's going to be injured for as long as he is? Was that kind of a last roll of the dice, 2 fingers up by Nuno Espirito Santo?
I mean, I think the full extent of the problem is yet to be determined. Obviously, there are concerns, but again, evaluations and scans and imaging was still taking place on Thursday. So he's been an integral part of that Forest team. Under Nuno, and I think he's a type of player that will flourish as well under Ange. So, potentially is a big player. His absence will be a bit of a blow. So that's just unfortunate. But look, that's football. That's part and parcel of the job.
And so Zinchenko can't play this weekend because it's against parent club. Aina, unsure. And then Dominguez is meniscus injury. So that's just kind of a long-term one.
Yeah, long-term. I certainly wouldn't expect Aina to be involved. Dominguez, again, all quiet with regards to that. We did see him in and around the squad during pre-season doing gym work. But as far as I'm aware, we haven't seen any sort of real work with the first team on the pitches and being fully involved in contact. So it might be a little while with that one. Obviously, the big bonus for Forest will be the likes of, Elliot Anderson will be brimming of confidence following his performances for the Three Lions. And certainly he'll be wanting to make a big impression, with the World Cup just around the corner.
So up next, it's the swear word in your parts, Sunderland. What is the latest on them?
I mean, again, a fairly extensive injury list. There was hope that at least one or two of those players would return after this international break, but for whatever reason, again, there's been one or two little setbacks, one or two players who've just been out, just a little bit on the long-term list. So it's taking them a little bit longer to get back up to speed in terms of, that sharpness, that fitness and working with the group. So we're not expecting too many changes. Dan Ballard was a player who, potentially could. That was an adductor issue that he picked up down at Turf Moor. We're probably looking at game week 5 for the centre back, with possibility of maybe Elise as well forcing his way into the Black Cat squad. A couple of their deadline day signings, they should be in and around it. Certainly no injury concerns, but they have been involved on one of them on international duty. So again, Lebre wasn't 100% certain in terms of where they are with their match fitness. But yeah, they could be in and around that squad.
Here's a nice dad joke for you, Ben. Sunderland have a particularly affectionate player. Can you guess his name?
Um,
Niall Huggins. He loves giving the Huggins.
well, move on, Jay. That's
terrible.
Horrendous.
That was horrendous. Okay.
It's horrendous.
Tottenham Hotspur up next. I mean, going from one horrendous thing to another horrendous thing, we go on to the horrendous Tottenham Hotspur. Very nice segue, that one. Let's talk us through the team there, because they did some great deadline deals and transfers. So the team is looking a little bit better, but I still think they have massive issues in defensive midfield and defense as well. They've kind of gone high up top. They've got some good kind of creative midfielders. Also, their strikers are pretty bad as well. But there's also plenty of injuries in this team that are going to be affecting them. Dominic Solanke is one, for the goal scoring. Obviously, we know James Maddison is out for the whole of the season. Dejan Kulusevski. Talk us through, Ben. Is anybody going to be back for game week 4 that they can be excited about?
Not as far as we know. East Basuma was an unspecified problem that picked up. Of course, he had that disciplinary issue under Thomas Frank at the beginning of the season that caused him to miss a game, and then on the eve of, I think it was game week 2, picked up a problem in training, and that ruled him out of the subsequent games. Hasn't been involved in any internationals, so it looks likely that East Basuma could miss it again, although there was certainly no mention from Thomas Frank. Dominic Solanke, that's been an ongoing ankle issue. Again, shouldn't be too far away, but this game's too soon. That means, there's pressure on Richarlison. Again, he's been away with Brazil, and that, issues with regards to fatigue. Tottenham will be looking to bounce back after losing last time out. As he's mentioned, Kulusevski, Maddison, all long term. Kulusevski has been providing quite a few updates on social media. He said he is pushing to return, but again, I don't think there's anything imminent there. And of course, Radu Dragusin, again, that was ACL injury. We're probably looking at round about maybe late October going into November for the centre back to be in and around that first team squad.
And so just looking at their game this weekend, it is against West Ham, 41% chance of victory. Do you think that they can do it, or will it be the team that lost to Bournemouth last week that will turn up? Is it going to be the West Ham that turned up last week as well? What do you think? Because again, it's a derby. It's two teams that don't like each other. These ones are really difficult to call. Would you maybe even back a draw?
I mean, what a result for West Ham, by the way, last time out. And maybe the off the field issues with Nuno did play a part in that, and subsequent, his relieving of duties at the club. But I don't think anybody, given the starts that both teams had, would have had, West Ham pegged for certainly a win, never mind 3-0. So, you have to, congratulate Graham Potter and his team for that performance there. A derby, a tough game. I'm going to sit on the fence here as well, Jay, and I'm going with the draw. I think it probably will suit both. I don't think neither are in great form. They both, we've seen Tottenham turn over Manchester City and then get turned over at home again. So there's certainly going to be that levels of inconsistencies in their performance during those early game weeks. I expect that to continue. So for me, again, an entertaining score draw.
Just quickly, I'm not sure if we answered it properly, but somebody has asked, when is Kulusevski likely to be back? That's after the next international break, isn't it? November time.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been no definitive, as you know, with a lot of long-term injuries, clubs are very reluctant to give any kind of definitive answers, particularly ones of the severity of this type of nature. So there's a number of reasons for that. Initially, when Postecoglou had spoken about a September return, Thomas Frank then said, well, we'll probably be looking at October. The reality is we could be looking at maybe going into November with that one. So once we see sort of Kulusevski back on the training pitches, working with the group full time, then into contact training, it's a gradual integration of process, and it's about activity-based solutions. And, they need to come through each sort of phase of that without any kind of reaction. So until you're actually getting in there and you're doing it on a daily basis, you're not really going to have a really good, solid understanding of how the player is going to react, and therefore, how long it's before they're back, on the training pitches and then back into first team contention.
So turning our attention to their opponents this weekend, West Ham seem to have a pretty good injury record at the moment. However, they will be looking, less than their optimal selves, with possibly Nicholas Füllkrug out. But it's a 25% chance. It's a late fitness test on that one. What's the information there?
Yeah, not as serious as first thought. He has historically had sort of calf and an Achilles issue, so that's the worry here. So, again, Graham Potter won't want to take any major risks with the German striker. But, there's an outside chance that he could actually be included in the squad, which didn't look likely earlier on in the break, when he was initially sort of withdrawn from the squad. So again, that's good news on that front.
And so finally, the last team for this week, and it's the guys that are playing your guys, it is Wolves. So what is the latest there? I guess a lot of Wolves fans will be looking forward to Jürgen Strand-Larsen being back, but is there any possibility for that for game week 4?
There isn't. In short, his absence from the team in game week 3, the rumour mill went into overdrive. There was talk about being heavily linked to Newcastle and whether the player had been, angling for a move. Vitor Pereira was fairly adamant that there was an injury there, an Achilles problem. That certainly wasn't the case. Now that injury is a little bit more severe than first thought. So he's out of contention. And again, there's nothing definitive on when he'll be come back. He's assessed on a day-to-day basis. Reading between the lines, we could be talking about a loading issue there. Could be a touch of tendinitis, one that can sort of flare up. So they need to manage that fairly conservatively, keep that load down. But again, it's something where you can maybe train 2 or 3 days normally, and then the 4th day on the eve of a game, something reacts overnight. So one just to keep an eye on with Strand-Larsen, but certainly he won't be involved at St James's Park.
Well, that is a blow for Wolves, but a positive there for Newcastle. However, that is the end of this week's broadcast. We are here every week for you. So do hit that subscribe button. Do like the video, share it, and get involved with the comments below. Ben said if Liverpool beat Burnley 9-0, he will pay you himself on the odds on that. So fingers crossed that Burnley do lose 9-0, because that would be quite funny to see, Ben. But you have to get involved with the comments. You do have to get involved with the comments. Otherwise, how are we going to know who to pay? Anyway, best of luck, everybody, for the weekend ahead. Thank goodness the football is back, and cheerio for now. There you go.